September the 27th, 2017. I'd like to begin with some very happy news at the Commission. I would like to introduce our newest public utility law judge, Ms. Jennifer Grace, who is in the audience today. Ms. Grace first came to the Commission in 2011, first as an assistant staff counsel and then as deputy staff counsel. And prior to that, Ms. Grace has had 10 years of trial experience in criminal and family law in Virginia, first as a Commonwealth attorney and then later at a private law firm and as a sole practitioner. So Judge Grace, we welcome you to the bench with us. We look forward to working with you, and congratulations. Okay, let's take our draft minutes from the September 13th, 2017 meeting. I will move to approve the minutes. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion carried. On to our consent agenda.
Mr. Chairman, we have 5 items on the consent agenda this morning. Item number 1 is Blockline Systems, LLC, filed its Maryland PSC tariff number 3 changes. The company proposes to reduce its composite terminating switch access rates. Item 2 is Metropolitan Telecommunications of Maryland, Inc., DBA MetTel, also filed revised tariff pages. The company proposes to increase the monthly recurring charge for its business message or measured line service. Item 3 is XO Communication Services, LLC, also filed Maryland Local Tariff number 5. The company proposes to increase its monthly recurring charges for its basic business lines. And finally, items 4 and 5 are filings from Chesapeake Utilities Corporation, Sandpiper Energy for item 4, and item 5, Washington Gas Light Company. They both filed their designations and approval of weather station areas in compliance with COMAR 20.31.03.03.
Any questions on the consent agenda? Okay, if not, do we have a motion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. For item number 1, I'd move that we accept the tariff revisions for filing with an effective date of July 29th, 2017. And for item number 2, I move that we accept the tariff revisions for filing with an effective date of October 15th, 2017. For item number 3, I move that we accept the tariff revisions for filing with an effective date of October 1st, 2017. And for item number 4 and 5, I move that we approve the weather station designations for the purpose of determining when there is an extreme weather period that requires restrictions on service terminations under COMAR 20.31.03.03 and 20.31.03.04.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion carries. On to our administrative agenda.
First item on the administrative agenda, item number 6, is Airbus DS Communications, Inc., Motorola Solutions, Inc., filed a joint application for transfer of indirect control of Airbus Communications.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Kenneth Albert on behalf of staff. This item addresses a request for Commissioner approval of a transaction in which Motorola Solutions will acquire all of the corporate shares of Plant Holdings. Plant Holdings is the direct parent of Airbus DS Communications, which is a licensed telecommunications carrier in Maryland. Therefore, Plant Holdings is deemed to be a public service company under the Public Utilities Article, and Motorola, which will acquire Plant Holdings, also provides telecommunications service. Commission approval is required here under Section 6101C of C4, of the Public Utilities Article, and with connection with a public service company acquiring the capital stock of another public service company. The applicants demonstrated the acquisition will allow Motorola to compete more effectively in telecommunications markets. Therefore, staff believes the transaction is in the public interest. Staff therefore recommends that the Commission approve the transfer to Motorola in direct control of Airbus.
Okay, any questions on this item? Commissioner O'Donnell.
Just a quick question. Do we know the financial value of this transaction?
I do not know that.
I mean, it won't change my position on supporting this because staff has determined it's in the public interest, and I concur with that determination, but it would be interesting for me, anyway, to know what the value of this is, unless it's proprietary for some reason.
Can you clarify what you mean by financial value?
So, yeah, what was the value of the transaction? One company is acquiring the stock of another. How much was that stock valued at when it was acquired?
Yeah, that's something we can find out certainly in the future.
Thank you.
Commissioner O'Donnell, you want to hold this in the meantime? Or
No, it's not going to change my position because I'm convinced that it's in the public interest, but I just was interested to know that information.
Very good. Any other questions? Not, do we have a motion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I move we approve the acquisition by Motorola Solutions of indirect control of Airbus DS Communications, Inc.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Next item number 7, is Verizon Maryland LLC, filed transmittal number 1828. The company proposes to increase its rate for business dial tone line service as a basic offering in Basket 2.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Lloyd Spivak for the Commission staff. This is a filing by Verizon Maryland proposing to increase the charge for business measured rate usage from 2.6 cents per minute to 2.8 cents per minute. Verizon is required under Section 4-202 of the Public Utilities Article to file tariffs for its basic business services. As authorized by the Public Utilities Article Section 4-301, the Commission, in Order Number 83137, approved a settlement establishing an alternative form of regulation and price cap plan for Verizon's regulated services in Maryland, including Verizon's basic business services. The alternative form of regulation classified Verizon services into 6 baskets. Basket 1 is residential, Basket 2 is business basic, Basket 3 is access, Basket 4 is discretionary services, Basket 5 is competitive services, and Basket 6 is other wholesale services. Business dial tone lines fall under Basket 2, business basic. Under paragraph 15 of the alternative form of regulation, the cap on the monthly recurring rate for standalone business dial tone line in Basket 2 shall increase by $2 per year, and the cap on all other Basket 2 rates shall increase by 10% per calendar year, regardless of whether Verizon actually increases the rate. Verizon may change rates in Basket 2 at any time, as long as the rate does not exceed the cap currently effective at that time, except that no single rate increase may exceed $4 for standalone business dial tone line and standalone business local usage in Basket 2, or 20% for any single increase to any other service in Basket 2. The proposed rate increase is permitted under the alternative form of regulation and price cap plan, as it does not exceed the rate cap increase of 10%. Customers were notified via bill message. Staff recommends acceptance of Verizon's tariff revisions for filing with an effective date of October 1st, 2017.
Thank you. Any questions for staff? Not, do we have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move the Commission accept the tariff revisions for filing with an effective date of October 1st, 2017.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Next item number 8, is Chesapeake Utility Corporation filed a notification of its intent to issue up to $100 million of unsecured long-term debt securities and 200 million shares of common stock.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Annette Garofalo on behalf of Commission staff. Chesapeake seeks authorization to issue up to $100 million of unsecured long-term debt and $200 million in common stock for an overall issuance of $300 million. Under Public Utilities Article Sections 6101A2 and 5203B2, a public service company that operates in Maryland must obtain prior Commission approval in order to assume, guarantee, or issue an obligation with regard to stocks, bonds, securities, or other evidence of indebtedness that is payable wholly or partly more than 12 months after the date of issuance, assumption, or guarantee. However, a prior Commission approval is not required if the public service company is one whose gross revenues for the most recent calendar year for which data are available are 3% or less than the total gross annual revenues of all public service companies in the state. During the same calendar year, the public service company provides prior written notice to the Commission of the transaction, and the public service company obtains approval of the transaction from the entity in another state that regulates it. This is the case with regard to Chesapeake. On October 24th, 2017, the company filed a copy of Order Number 9107, issued August 22nd by the Delaware Public Service Commission, approving the company's issuance of this same transaction that's before you. And this is contained in, this order is contained in the application. You've received it separately, but it's noted in the transaction, in the buck sheet, and I believe you've received that. By this application, Chesapeake meets all the requirements of Public Utilities 6101A4 and 5203B5, and staff recommends that the Commission note the filing.
Thank you. Any questions, Commissioner O'Donnell?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It might be for the company for some of this, but I wanted to ask a few questions. The buck sheet says the company intends to use the proceeds of the issuance of the fund to fund known capital expenditures and potential future capital projects over the next 12 to 24 months. The capital projects include natural gas expansion on the Eastern Shore. Does staff know what these projects are, have a sense of these projects? Was that discussed?
Good morning, Chairman and Commissioners. Jeff Pongsteri for staff. I believe part of the projects also relate to Sandpiper's conversion of propane customers to natural gas as well.
Okay. Is that it? Is that $300 million for that?
I would probably defer to the company on the remaining projects.
Fair enough. And well, I'll wait till the company comes up. I'll ask the company. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions for staff? Not. We have Mr. Quinn here representing the company. Mr. Quinn.
Good morning, Commissioners. Yes, Commissioner O'Donnell, the company issues debt and common stock company-wide. So Chesapeake, Maryland Division is a division of the overall company of Chesapeake. They also have local distribution companies in Delaware and in Florida. So Chesapeake, Maryland Division, and Sandpiper, who's a subsidiary of Chesapeake, they get pieces of the overall debt issuance that are spread across the company. So yes, this staff did ask questions about how much would be spent in Maryland or how much they expect to be spent in Maryland. Some of this is conditioned to be spent in Maryland on Sandpiper's actually undergoing some conversions from propane to natural gas, and just general upkeep of the Sandpiper and Chesapeake territory. So we're expanding into Worcester County. So we're converting those customers that were formerly propane customers into natural gas customers. The company's also expanding in Lower Delaware, and they're using some of the funds as part of that. So, and some of this was described, I think, in the Delaware order, but also through some DRs with staff.
Do you know what the proportionality of the expenditures in Delaware's approved this already, right?
Right.
Do you know what the proportionality between Delaware and Maryland is?
Well, they obviously don't expect to spend $300 million in a year or so. So I think they're anticipating spending, issuing the debt in 2018, or issuing the equity in 2018. I'm told in 2018 they hope to spend $32 million in Maryland as part of their conversions, and I can get you more
Okay.
as needed. I'll get you the percentage they expect to spend in each jurisdiction.
Thank you, Mr. Quinn. Eastern Shore Natural Gas is a subsidiary of Chesapeake Utilities, isn't it?
The pipeline?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Will any of these monies go for that pipeline
No.
expansion?
No.
I mean, what stops that?
Well, you know what? Now that I didn't ask about the pipeline, but yes, they are an affiliate of the company, so I assume they're part of the entities that could receive some of this. As you know, the pipeline's in front of the FERC right now in a rate case. They've also recently expanded. They're fully regulated at the federal level. The Chesapeake is participating in that rate case, by the way, as a shipper and in protection of their customers. But I imagine it was too quick to answer. No, I didn't ask that question. I assume it's possible.
Fair enough, Mr. Quinn. I appreciate it. Is there any timeliness issues that would be impacted if we were to hold this for further information?
I don't think so. So feel free, and I'll get the questions, both those answers to you, if you'd like to hold the filing.
Yes, sir. I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman. I'll wait for other questions if there are any, but I
Okay,
think I'd
Mr.
like
Ford, let's see. Thank you, Mr. Quinn. Let's see if there are any other questions. All right, there are not, so the issue is before us.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we hold this pending, take this under advisement for further action.
Well, I'd like to, I don't mind holding it for a week or two, but since I think we are somewhat restricted on what we can do with this issue legally, I don't want to hold it for too long. So why don't we do this? Mr. Quinn, can you try to get us some answers back as quickly as possible?
Yes,
And we'll
I've
try to get this back on our agenda.
done a good job of confusing you this morning, so
All right, very good.
Appreciate it.
see if I
We
can
will hold
confuse you.
item 8.
Mr. Chairman, did you say how long you were going to hold
Well,
on?
I'd like to, let me ask our executive
I
secretary.
think we're going to hold it for 2 weeks, so I don't think we have an admin meeting next week.
I didn't think so.
Right.
Yeah,
So,
so 2 weeks.
We'll get
Okay.
it on the 2 weeks from today.
got it. Thank you.
Okay, next item. Item number 9 is PSEG Keys Energy Center LLC. Filed a motion to amend certain conditions of its CPCN. It's in case number 9297.
Good morning, Chairman, Commissioners. Michael Dean on behalf of staff. Item 9 is a filing by PSEG Keys Energy Center LLC requesting authority to amend certain conditions of its Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity to construct a 735 megawatt combined natural gas fueled electric generating facility located in Prince George's County. Under Public Utilities Section 7-207, the Commission, by an order in 2014, issued a certificate of public convenience and necessity to PSEG Keys Energy Center for the construction of a generating facility, which had several conditions related to protecting the environment through monitoring and control of air emissions. Under Section 7-205, a modification may not be performed to a generating station without prior approval of the Commission, and modification is defined to include physical alterations, changes to the facility, and changes in fuel which could result in a change of air emissions from the plant or from a generating unit of the plant. However, a modification does not include a change that the Commission determines will not result in an increase in air emissions from the plant or a unit of the plant. The following describes the changes in the facility which would require changes to the conditions to the Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity, such as the reduction in size of a fire pump from 300 to 275 horsepower, an alteration in the definition of startup as reaching steady state operation, and changes in annual emission limits due to the transfer of ownership of part of a switchyard to the Potomac Electric Power Company, which included an auxiliary generator and a fuel tank, as well as some design configuration changes to certain specified heights and location of site facilities, and a change in the listed name of the owner of the generating facility to PSEG Keys Energy Center. Lastly, there is also a change in emissions modeling for PM 2.5, as Prince George's County has improved from being designated as a non-attainment to an attainment county. The Power Plant Research Program of the Department of Natural Resources and the Maryland Department of the Environment, Air and Radiation Management Administration has reviewed the request as discussed in their filing of September 12, 2017, mail log number 216830, and has determined that the proposed changes to the conditions do not result from an increase in air emissions and have acceptable effects on air quality and represent definitional changes which are minor in nature. This letter states that PPRP and the ARMA recommend that the changes as proposed in the submittal be approved by the Commission. Staff has reviewed the filings and agrees with this conclusion and recommends that the Commission approve to amend certain conditions of the Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity as proposed by the Power Plant Research Program in Maryland Department of the Environment in response to this filing.
Thank you, Mr. Dean. Any questions for staff?
Yes.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
I'm on a roll today, Mr. Chairman. Sorry, I have to continue. Does staff, Mr. Dean, does staff know if the 2014 CPCM was a contested case? Were there parties that contested that CPCM?
It was obviously docketed as a contested case, and there are other parties to the in the proceeding, including the federal agencies.
Do you know if those parties were given notice of this modification or amendment to the CPCM?
The initial filing was sent to the service list dated September 8, 2014.
And did any of those parties respond to this?
They have not filed any responses. I did receive an email from the federal agencies asking whether or not this was on the agenda for today. I would note that it was sent late yesterday, so I didn't see it until this morning. They didn't express any concerns, however, they did state that they had not finished reviewing the filing.
Okay. Do we know? So we recently had a modification regarding a CPCN that affected air quality, and it was determined by PPRP that, or recommended by PPRP, that under the provisions, if I recall correctly, under the provisions of the Clean Air Act, that we had to have a public hearing on that modification. But this case seems similar, but it's different. Can you explain why we don't have to go to a public hearing under the provisions of the Clean Air Act? Or maybe the Attorney General for PPRP can enlighten us if our staff counsel doesn't know or staff doesn't know.
I would defer to them as they are the experts on the Clean Air Act.
Thank you.
Morning, Chairman and Commissioners. Steve Tolson, I'm Principal Counsel for PPRP. I have with me this morning Mr. Mark Garrison, who's the air emissions contractor for PPRP, and I believe he can address that issue. So I will call him up if I may.
Good morning, Commissioners. I think the question about the other CPCN that was also experienced a modification, the differences between the two is that the other one actually did have an increase in emissions that triggered the requirements of the Prevention of Significant Deterioration, or PSD program, whereas in the case of PSEG Keys, there was no increase in emissions, no change in emissions, actually some small decreases in emissions. And that's, I think, the fundamental difference.
Yeah, I recall that other case didn't have an actual increase in emissions. They were just changing their methodology for monitoring those phantom emissions. And not necessarily an increase. There was an increase in the number of connections and a change in the methodology, but not an increase in emissions per se.
That does not ring a familiar bell, I'm afraid. The one that I'm aware of actually had an increase that triggered the PSD provisions. Talk about the Dominion Cove Point. Okay. Yeah, I believe that was also a case where the projected emissions increased, and I have to admit that I'm not as familiar with that case as I am with PSEG Keys and with CPV.
Yeah.
But I think that there were some sort of underlying changes in terms of which turbines would be operating and which would not be operating. That does constitute a change in the equipment and the power generating units at the facility.
Right. I think those issues were up for review in that case, as they are in this case. They're up for review. It's asserted that there will be no emissions increase by, I guess, the company and PPRP, but that's up for review. And so when things are up for review, in that case or in this case, I want to be consistent. I want to make sure PPRP is being consistent and the Commission's being consistent with regard to what has to go to a public hearing and what does not, and that they not be random or arbitrary in what goes to a public hearing and what does not. So that's why I'm asking about the difference between that case and this case.
I understand, and I have to confess I'm speaking a little bit out of my area of expertise in terms of the Dominion Cove Point. But my understanding was Cove Point is actually an existing facility that was undergoing a modification. And as part of,
excuse me, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but the approved CPCN is the approved CPCN, and the change to it is a change to it.
Right.
And the CPCN for that facility, to be honest with you, was a CPCN for a modification to the facility that has not become operational yet.
Okay. Again, I think we'll probably have to defer somewhat to that question and provide more information as to the differences between the two, because I can't speak completely to Dominion Cove Point, other than to say my understanding is that different equipment is going to be used in the modified facility than was anticipated in the original CPCN. In the PSEG Keys case, it's all the same equipment. The equipment has not changed with the exception, well, I guess the main equipment, the combustion turbines, have not changed. There are some changes to the auxiliary equipment, the auxiliary boiler, and one of the emergency generators. But I think it probably is fair to say that we owe a better explanation than that to the Commission to make sure you understand the differences between the two.
Thank you.
And if I may, Commissioner O'Donnell, if you'd like, we can, Mr. Bill Paul, who's from the Air and Radiation Management Administration, is not here today. He's on medical leave. He would probably have better information on that, but I would like to consult with him, and we could file a supplemental response to your question if you'd like. I know there's a public hearing next Tuesday for the Dominion Cove Point CPCN modification, and I'd like to at least give everybody an opportunity to give their input for us to give you like you said, you want a consistent response. Well, that's better than doing it ad hoc here.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that very much, Mr. Tolson.
All right, we have the company here too. Any questions? Mr. McGee, anything you'd like to add?
Sure. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. James McGee with Alexander and Cleaver on behalf of PSEG Keys Energy Center. My understanding is an understanding. It's the same as what PPRP laid out. I was trying to hopefully find a statutory reference. I can quote you now, but I don't have. Excuse me, I don't have one. So we're not opposed to waiting until the next administrative meeting so that a fuller response can be heard. I do have comments, though, on your first question, Commissioner O'Donnell, about the notice to other parties. I actually met this morning with the attorney for Joint Base Andrews. He had filed a substitution change because the person who's now taking over for them isn't on the service list. Nevertheless, they did get the application from us and the responses by PPRP. I spoke to them yesterday as well, and their main concern is making sure that nothing that we're doing here interferes with their microwave path from their Brandywine station, and there's one in Davidsonville and then in Joint Base Andrews. So there's a agreement that my client had made with Joint Base Andrews, a long-term agreement where it shows an exhibit of a map, and it's basically a red triangle that shows the lines that JBA would need to be clear. And PSEG's plant is slightly to the east of that line. We've made a new rendition of a drawing that shows the changes that we're having in this CPCN for this filing are still within the original footprint. We've provided that to JBA yesterday. They've approved that and said they have no concerns. I don't have anything in writing. I have an email, but I'm happy to also submit that when you take this matter up for consideration at the next administrative meeting.
I appreciate that, and that's very helpful. It highlights, I think, sometimes the need for public hearings. You can get all that on the record so that it's transparent to the public and that we're consistent in our decisions. But I appreciate the information. Very, very helpful.
You're welcome.
Okay, so what is your request?
Request, Mr. Chairman, is to hold this to the next administrative meeting available so that the responses can be provided to the Commission.
All right, we will hold it for 2 weeks, but I want to take action on this at our next administrative meeting in 2 weeks. This is a straightforward modification. I think the Commission should approve. All right, we will hold item number 9. Let's go to item 10.
Next item on the agenda, Mr. Chairman, item number 10 is Baltimore Gas and Electric Company filed supplement number 607 to PSC Maryland E6. The company proposes to make revisions to the standard offer service administrative charges, including a rider one of its retail electric service tariff.
These are revised rates by Baltimore Gas and Electric Company. The new rates are revised rates that were previously accepted by the Commission on May 31, 2017. The new administrative charge rates represent true-ups of actual incremental, uncollectible, and cash working capital costs to the estimated costs of providing residential, Type 1, Type 2, and hourly service under SOS. Any over or under collection of costs compared to the estimated costs for the program year are included in these rates. As noted in staff's comments, the return component of the administrative charge is only updated on an annual basis. The administrative adjustment component of the charge is currently set at 0 mils per kilowatt hour. BGE has provided staff the sales and cost figures used to calculate the new administrative charge rates. Staff has reviewed the calculations and found them to be accurate. I should note that we are aware that OPC has filed comments saying that these charges are not accurate under the Commission's final order in this case. However, staff has reviewed the order and the filings and OPC's letter. We think that that is the same argument that both staff's position is correctly stated and OPC presented to the Commission, and that the Commission's final order found that there was nothing more to be examined with regard to those. So these new rates will be effective from October 1, 2017 through January 31, 2018. The new rates have decreased for residential Type 2 and hourly customers, but have increased slightly for Type 1 customers. Staff recommends the Commission accept for filing BGE's revised rates.
All right, thank you, Ms. Garofalo. Any questions for staff before we hear from First Office of People's Counsel, and then we'll hear from the company? All right, not Ms. Knoll.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Molly Knoll on behalf of the Office of People's Counsel. The company was kind enough to remind me that the return is trued up annually, whereas the other components are trued up 3 times per year. So at this time, OPC no longer considers these to be improperly calculated. We would highlight for the Commission the fact that at this point, the cash working capital asset at the Commission-approved rate of return is 0.88 mils per kilowatt hour, and then the company is also getting a second return at 0.93, which actually exceeds the Commission-authorized rate of return. However, staff is correct that that is what Order 87891 ordered. We do have that on appeal, and we are exercising our rights on that, but we will expect to see a recalculation of the return component in the next true-up filing. It's not quarterly, it's 3 times per year. So in approximately 4 months, we'll expect to see a change to that return component. And I would remind the Commission that that will be an adjustment, not a true-up. So the recovery beyond the authorized rate of return that's currently occurring will not be reversed or adjusted in any way. It'll simply stop going forward. So, any questions? I'm available.
Thank you, Ms. Knoll. Any questions for Commissioner O'Donnell?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Knoll, how might this approval, were we to approve it this morning, affect your appeal on that outstanding order?
Your Honor, the first time the company filed their tariff after we had completed our litigation in front of the Commission, we requested that there be subject to refund, that the tariff go into effect subject to refund, depending what would happen with the appeal. The appeal is not affected by the tariff filing. It's not affected by what the Commission does at this point in time. But if it is ultimately found that there's an over-recovery, if the rates, there was a lot of discussion at that hearing as to whether or not the Commission needed to state subject to refund or not. But any over-recovery that has happened up to the time that the appeal comes back to the Commission would simply be an overpayment by customers. There wouldn't necessarily be a remedy for that. But the Commission's action on this tariff will not affect OPC's appeal process.
Has that order become final?
Yes, Your Honor. The order was issued in November of 2016. Thank you. the case has been active since about 2007, so I get my years mixed up. It was approved in November of 2016. It became final in December of 2016. OPC appealed. We had our circuit court hearing, and we are now on appeal to the Court of Appeals.
Okay.
Court of Special Appeals, I apologize.
We also have a proposed order, I think, before us now that impacts this area too.
Yes, Your Honor, the PHI companies.
Yeah. Okay.
And that is a proposed order at the moment. If no party appeals it by October 7, then it'll become a final order. However, if OPC appeals that before October 7th, it will then be in front of this commission. And that order is using the same methodology as was approved in 87891. So the commission will have an opportunity to review that for the PHI companies in the near future.
Okay. So this shouldn't impact that at this point.
No, Your Honor.
All right. Fair enough. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Knoll.
Good morning, Commissioners. Beverly Sakura on behalf of BGE. Ms. Knoll already provided the information that I was going to, that the true-up or the adjustment of the return is done on an annual basis, not 3 times a year like the other components. So have nothing else to add, but I'm available if you have questions.
Well, thank you, Ms. Sikora. Any questions for the company? All right, if not, thank you very much. The issue is before us. Do we have a motion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I move that we accept the tariff revisions for filing with an effective date of October 1st, 2017.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
The last item on the agenda today is item number 11. It's also a filing from Baltimore Gas and Electric Company. It's a request to revise the methodology by which feeders are included in the poorest performing feeder program.
Commissioner Chairman Michael Dean again on behalf of staff. Item 11 is a filing by the Baltimore Gas Electric Company requesting approval to revise the method by which feeders are included in its poorest performing feeder program so that no consideration is given to the number of persons served by the feeder in the selection process. Under Cromar 20.50.12.03A, electric companies report each year the 3% of feeders identified as having the poorest reliability, and that a feeder ranked among the lowest 3% is not to be listed in the subsequent 12-month reporting periods after allowing 12 months to implement remediation measures unless the company has undertaken reasonable remediation measures to improve the performance of that feeder. The regulations further state that the method used to identify these feeders cannot be changed without commission approval. The Baltimore Gas and Electric Company filing notes that the current selection process used by the company is to first divide the feeders into 2 groups, with one less than 100 customers and the other for those feeders with more than 100 customers. The proposed methodology is to not divide the feeders by the number of customers served, but to then first rank them by their system average interruption frequency index, or SAFE, and select the poorest performing 4%, and then to rank these by the system average interruption duration index, or SAIDI, with the top 3% selected for remediation. As discussed in its comments, staff has reviewed the proposed change in feeder selection methodology and agrees that it may aid the company in selecting those feeders needing remediation. Staff notes that the company is the only utility in Maryland that had used the number of customers served as a poorest performing feeder selection criteria. Staff also notes that the selection process for the poorest performing feeder program in Maryland is currently the subject of a work group and was discussed during the recent 2016 annual reliability performance hearings in case number 9353. The request from Baltimore Gas Electric Company for its selection methodology change is not an implementation of the poorest performing feeder work group recommendations. The company is filing a request that its proposed change be approved by September 30th. Staff has reviewed the filing and, as discussed in its comments, recommends that the Commission approve the revised methodology to determine the feeders with the poorest reliability as submitted by the company in accordance with Cromar 20.50.12.03 4A4 with an effective date of September 30, 2017.
Thank you, Mr. Dean. Appreciate that. Any questions for our staff? We also have okay, if not, yes.
Just a quick question.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
Mr. Dean, we just had hearings recently on reliability performance, and I think we have an order pending. I don't know that it's gone out yet, but I think it might be close. This decision, should we approve it today, shouldn't influence anything in that reliability performance report, should it? Shouldn't prejudice it in any way?
It should not.
All right, fair enough. That answers my question, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Sure. Commissioner Linton.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question. If we remove the standard to separate the poorest performing feeders between 1 to 100 and then everybody beyond that, do we create a situation where customers that are on a feeder with less than 100 customers fall into a situation where they may not receive attention as quickly as somebody who's on a feeder with more customers?
Hi, good morning, Chairman, Commissioners, Commissioner Linton, Kevin Zhong with the engineering staff. First, the part of the answer would be the poorest performance feeder program is not the only program that addresses reliability. And secondly, based on the last 3 years' results, I have quoted some of the report from BG&E stating that they've looked at the smaller groups of the group of feeders with fewer customers, and they look at the reliability and the remedies, and they draw the conclusion should the size be introduced as a factor in determining the poorest performing feeders. In some cases, they are actually potentially overlooking the larger sized feeders, which are also potentially in need of reliability remediations or maintenance.
So I guess along those lines, then, if you have, I'm trying to understand a situation where you have maybe 5 customers on one feeder, just as an example, versus another feeder with thousands of customers, not thousands, but more than 100. In that situation, is that second feeder, that first feeder, going to receive the same level of attention from the utility if this standard is removed?
In fact, with the modification, we're merely lifting the requirement that you have to first divide into 2 groups. So if one feeder with, say, 5 customers still continue to have poor performance, it will still be addressed. It's just so that we don't have to pre-qualify it because it has fewer customers. And also, just to add a note, this is only BG&E's own practice in the last 3 years to have different sized feeders grouped differently. It's not being practiced by any other utilities in the state of Maryland.
Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Sikora, anything you would like to add?
You know, I would just add that we've actually been doing the split for more than 3 years, and I think when we first implemented it was with the idea that we, needed to kind of separate them so that the smaller feeders didn't, not get the attention they needed. But, in the interim, we've made other changes to how we, pick the poorest performing feeders, and I think, with those changes, we've seen that really it's just the opposite has been happening, that feeders with more than 100 customers who are actually worse performing are not getting on the list, while feeders that are less than 100 customers are getting on the list just because we do that division. And so, looking back, it just seems, to make more sense to look at them all together, and because we're using SAFE and SAIDI, which are averages, that, if it's truly a poorest performing feeder, it's going to get on the list regardless of the number of customers. And like Mr. Zhang said, we do, look at other things, and we have other programs that will address issues that come up on a feeder. It's not just the poorest performing feeder program that, will look at things.
Quick question for the company.
All right, we'll start with Commissioner Herman, then Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you. Ms. Sikora, does the transition to a different methodology cause any issues with respect to comparison, what from this year to next year with the change?
No, according to Mr. Summerson, nodding his head.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Sikora, you heard the question I asked Mr. Dean, and I'm specifically referring to any potential future work that the poorest performing feeder work group may entertain. And I just want to make sure that well, the company's a participant in that work group, right, of course. And want to make sure the company understands that this is not a signal, should we approve this by the commission, that this is where we expect the center to be in this area for that work group or anything going forward, because I know the companies have certainly been asking for changes in this arena for a while, and I suspect that those discussions may continue in the immediate future going forward. So do you understand?
Yes, and
this doesn't
actually,
prejudice that?
I think, we're actually expecting to have some more guidance on the changes to the poorest performing feeder before, I guess, this evaluation year, which starts in October. So that's why we actually made the filing, because I think, seeing the comments that staff made in case number 9353, that, they wanted to relook at kind of what the work group did and take a second, have more discussions. We realized we wouldn't get that guidance by October 1st. So we just, for this year, we want to, go back to not separate them. And actually, in a way, it'll make discussions a little bit easier because, that, like Mr. Shang said, we were an outlier with this where we were the only one doing it. So, this at least brings us a little bit more in line with everyone else. But, I think, we very well expect that, that this is going to be an interim year and, there will be changes going forward. So.
Fair enough. I just want to make sure we all had a common understanding that this is not signaling where we expect this discussion to be or remain necessarily.
Nope, that understood.
Thank you.
Any final questions for the morning? All right, if not, do we have a motion on item 11?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I move we approve the revised methodology to determine the feeders with the poorest reliability submitted by the company in accordance with COMAR 2050-1203A4, effective September 30th, 2017.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thanks, everyone. We are adjourned.